Qualifying tomorrow afternoon. That's the one that decides the grid. This is merely deciding the order. They go, as you can see, Coulthard first because he was the winner in Australia 2 weeks ago. Montoya finished second that day and on down through the field, which, Martin, I think might well turn out to be quite an advantage for Rubens Barrichello. Really the first time in Grand Prix racing that the effect of a previous race has a knock-on effect to the next one. Rubens will go last today, which theoretically ought to be a bit faster for him, which should make him pretty competitive again tomorrow.
Yes, James, of course he was one of the first people to drop out of the Grand Prix in Malaysia, didn't score any points, didn't score a finish, and he's at the back of the field. Coulthard won the race, leads the championship, goes first. There's just been a dozen Formula Fords practicing. Not often you see cars on the track in between crucial Formula One runs, and they'll be cleaning up, they're much harder tyres, they'll be cleaning up some of the Formula One rubber. So Coulthard at a disadvantage, but he was the fastest man this morning by a couple of tenths of a second and does look quite good. Michelin's looking quite good for the one-lap flyers, so Coulthard will be pretty confident. He's out there in 46 degrees now, the track temperature, 34 the air temperature, 46% humidity. It's absolutely sweltering, isn't it? Even just walking outside the commentary box, it's like stepping into an oven.
Yes, it's warmer than it was here on race day last year. I remember that being an extremely hot day. Certainly round about this time of the year we get quite a bit of rain. It comes very suddenly in monsoon-like quantities, and in the last few days that we've been here it's been coming around about 4:30 in the afternoon. Now the race on Sunday will begin at 3, so there is a possibility that the very end of the race might be rain affected, but it seems we'll probably get both today's and tomorrow's qualifying sessions away unaffected by rain. David Coulthard then on his warm-up lap. He hasn't started his flying lap yet, that will begin in a moment, but there's no mistaking, Martin, the sheer confidence that this win in Melbourne has given to the McLaren team. It's been a real shot in the arm. They're all walking a few inches taller, and Coulthard himself, who was very relaxed in Melbourne, now seems to be really, really excited about his prospects for the season.
Yes, and with the points system as it is now, he can afford to wait for that new car and just go for scoring points. As he said in our interview, a win would be great, but I want some points this weekend. We saw him very calmly taking the outlap, swarming his brakes up on the back straight to have some brake temperature down into turn 1 without taking too much out of his tyres. And Coulthard looking pretty cautious actually down there, no doubt about it. And we saw a 1:36 this morning. That's a second slower than last year's pole position. But this, of course, is the only time in the weekend we're going to see a Formula One car on very low fuel attacking, trying to get a better slot for tomorrow afternoon. Fastest today, go last tomorrow, and that gives them a better idea of what they've got to do. And look at the direction change. That McLaren really working well on fresh Michelin tyres. It's a fabulous racetrack. All the drivers like it, even though the weather conditions tax them enormously. Down now to that hairpin at turn 9, and Coulthard neatly using all the track. If you watch him, he uses less arm movement in the car than most of the drivers. Jenson Button too is a very smooth driver. The pair of them, I think, undoubtedly the smoothest on the racetrack. Sometimes it causes them problems, especially when they can't get enough tyre temperature because they're not so aggressive with the car. But other times, usually at circuits like this, it should help Coulthard nicely. But really not a super aggressive lap, is it, James?
No, very smooth. Coulthard using the updated version of last year's McLaren MP417. We're expecting the new car around about the 4th or 5th race of the season. This is the first flying lap then of the afternoon. What sort of time has David Coulthard managed? A 1:36.2, so pretty good recovery. It didn't look spectacular, but it's not far off the pace he set this morning.
The car was hooked up though, wasn't it? It was really, it was neat and tidy, and it wasn't sliding front or rear, but he looked like he could have taken it to the edge a little bit more. That's a tenth slower than his fastest time of the morning, but that still would have put him fastest, so we'll have to wait and see. I think other drivers didn't get out with low fuel and fresh tyres. And Montoya then, he had, after Coulthard started his flying lap, Montoya had 30 seconds of green light to get out of the pit, so he is then on his warm-up lap as Coulthard's on his hot lap, and that's why Montoya then immediately into that first flying lap of his. Unusual camera angle there, mostly grass in the beginning, but then finally picking up the flying Colombian.
Yep, Juan Montoya said in Australia that this new Williams is not a great car, but it could well turn out to be the base of one. He's a 10th up at the moment on David Coulthard in the first sector, and Martin felt that Coulthard was fairly cautious in that opening sector, so maybe that's where Coulthard lost his time. Can Montoya maintain the momentum on the remainder of this lap? Certainly Patrick Head, the team's technical director, has not travelled out this weekend to Malaysia. He's stayed back in England to work on this car with his boffins in the back room to try and find more speed from it as we ride on board with Montoya.
Armfuls are locked then through turn 9. They call that turn 10, but really it's just an acceleration zone. Look, he's half second up on Coulthard. The Williams looking fast, Montoya looking very aggressive, totally committed through turn 12 there, and generally looking much more like he wants a fast lap today. Coulthard seemed just pretty cautious, pretty happy really. It didn't seem like he wanted to pump in the fastest lap. Of course tomorrow it really depends on how the weather goes. It has been raining every day, but not until after the qualifying session will have finished, as you said, James. But Montoya then on the throttle early, back end trying to step out. It's scooped up by the electronics and the traction control, and he ends up just 0.3 faster than Coulthard, but a good lap then from Juan Pablo Montoya.
Yeah, Montoya, the qualifying king, 10 pole positions in his brief Formula One career to date, and he's slightly frustrated by the new rules which oblige them to carry a race quantity of fuel on Saturday qualifying. As Martin was saying, this is the only time of the weekend, as we look at Kimi Räikkönen going out on his outlap, this is the only time of the weekend that the drivers really have a chance to go for it with their cars as low as on fuel as they possibly could be, and maximum speed. Kimi Räikkönen then down the main straight, a man unlucky in many ways not to win in Melbourne. He was penalised for speeding infringement just at 1 mile an hour over the speed limit, but it was enough to cause him to have a drive-through penalty and probably cost him the race. But on the day it was a lot of drivers that made mistakes, and David Coulthard didn't, and that's why he won the Australian Grand Prix. Now Räikkönen, what can he do?
He's just a couple of tenths down then on Montoya. He had a dismal morning, just 15th fastest, a couple of seconds off the pace, had a few car problems, and I don't believe got out on low fuel. Once again, the McLaren changing direction brilliantly, but Räikkönen having to fight the car. He certainly hasn't got the setup he wants yet on this car, no doubt about it. He's fast and he's attacking, but he's definitely having to hang on a little bit through some of these corners, and also he's turning in quite early into the corners too, as if he's not absolutely sure of the front end. And he's pretty much matching Montoya at this stage. Coulthard was the fastest in the third sector. Räikkönen looks as if he could just pop himself somewhere between Montoya and Coulthard at the moment to pick up second place.
Remember what we were saying about it appearing that Michelin have a good tyre here this weekend. Both the McLarens and the Williamses are using that Michelin tyre as Räikkönen goes down the back straight. Just one more corner to go on this lap, and look at the straight line speed, pretty much the same. Driving for the line then, Kimi Räikkönen. Can he beat Juan Montoya's 1:35.939? No, he can't. Just a whisker outside. 9/100ths of a second. Are you slightly surprised, Martin, that the pace of the Williams and the McLaren is so close? I mean, many people expected McLaren to be a step ahead of Williams at this stage.
No, I think, of course, you've got Williams' new car, their best effort for 2003, whereas the McLaren currently is a tidy-up of the 2002 car. And Williams quite openly say our car's better than last year, but not as much as we'd hoped. So I'm not at all surprised to see them pretty much on even par. But then the first driver of the afternoon on the Bridgestones, Michael Schumacher, finished fourth in Australia, therefore fourth in the championship, runs fourth on this Friday qualifying one, and we'll see just how Bridgestones are shaping up. And you have to say the team looks a little bit out of sorts. They chose the wrong tyres in Melbourne. They had some dramas through the race, one of their drivers off the road, and the car's been all over the show this morning, and you just wonder, and you can't help but think Ferrari a touch on their back foot.
I wonder if it's success fatigue. They've had so much success for so many years. It's very difficult to keep a team on the bubble, isn't it? Keep them wanting to win. On board though with Michael Schumacher, he certainly looks like he's pushing hard.
Pushing extremely hard. He's a fraction up on Montoya, and back end of the car was drifting beautifully through turns 5 and 6 and 7, and Schumacher then really pushing extremely hard. And he said in his interview with ITV I really want to find out where we're at this weekend. They struggled a little bit here last year, and look, 6/10 up already. So he wants to lay down a marker early on in the weekend and say, listen, no problem with Ferrari. He's been asked by a lot of journalists, what's the problem, what's going on? You didn't look happy at the last race, a lot of dramas, but it has to be said, he was still the quickest driver at the end of the Grand Prix, even though he finished 4th. So Schumacher then just a long straight, one hairpin the final turn. We're on board with him as he heads down to that turn. Brakes then by a pit lane entry, not the one they use in the Grand Prix. Just walking the front end away from the apex a little bit, not an ideal line, but it was good enough, and Schumacher surely will go fastest with that, and he does by some margin, and that is quicker even than last year's pole position set by him on a 1:35.2. So that's a stunning first lap. Low fuel on the Ferrari, new tyres, first time we've seen that through the weekend, and Schumacher really, that's a stunning lap time.
Remember, this is an updated version of the 2002 car as well, so they're running the same tactics as the McLaren team, delaying the arrival of the 2003 car. And interestingly, Luca Badoer, the Ferrari team's test driver, has crashed that car heavily, the new 2003 spec car, crashed it very heavily. Some talk that that new car might be a little bit delayed as a result. Jarno Trulli on track now. The man who finished in 5th place in Australia for Renault, and I think they were a little bit surprised at how competitive they were in Australia, because both Trulli and Alonso finished in the points. They looked really quick all weekend, and you have to say, although Trulli's 4/10 down from Michael Schumacher right now, that throughout today in the free practice sessions they have been very quick indeed.
Yes, this chassis appears to be working very well, doesn't it? It's probably one of the best balanced chassis on the racetrack at the moment. Trulli now beginning to push a little bit harder. I think he'll know from his readout on the dashboard that was not a particularly stellar first sector time, and he's coming down to the hairpin at turn 9 now. We'll get his second sector time just on the exit of this corner to see if he has indeed picked up a little bit of pace, but now he's dropped to over a second adrift now. So this is a surprisingly slow effort from Trulli. Remember, Renault have chosen to be one of the teams, the 4 teams that go into the extra test session on a Friday morning, which gives them 2 hours of running, should give them quite a head start on a Friday, because the other teams have had 1 hour of total running before this one lap flyer, and Renault have had 3 hours of track action, especially here where there's no testing year round. And we just saw the Ferrari getting out of his way, going into the pit lane as he comes to the end of that tour, and he's going to go 5th fastest out of the 5 that's run so far, and a long way adrift of Michael Schumacher.
Michael Schumacher fastest, Montoya 2nd, Raikkonen 3rd, Coulthard 4th, Trulli 5th. Next man up will be Heinz-Harald Frentzen in a moment.
San Pablo, that looked like a pretty strong lap. Were you happy with it?
Yeah, I did a couple of mistakes, but it was generally pretty good. I was pretty committed to it, so it was good.
Do you reckon the Michelins have come here with a good tyre?
It looks like, we'll see how good as a race tyre it is. It's very good in one lap.
Thank you.
Heinz-Harald Frentzen on track. 5 cars have gone, 15 still to go. And this man has a pretty good record around here. He's been in the points twice, and last year Sauber were very competitive in the Malaysian Grand Prix, racing against the McLarens at one stage during the race. Can they repeat here? Backed, of course, by Petronas, a huge oil company based here in Malaysia, and the Petronas Towers are 2 of massive monuments to the enormous power of this oil company. And certainly Frentzen and Heidfeld, his teammate, have had an enormous programme of promotional work this week, including, I was astonished to see, a visit to a fertiliser factory. I bet they were thrilled by having to do that. Here is Heinz-Harald winding it up, and it's good to see him back in Formula 1, isn't it, Martin? He's still got quite a bit to offer, this guy.
He certainly has, and he's given his younger fellow German teammate a bit of a hurry up too in Heidfeld, but Frentzen can still cut the mustard. A very, very steady outlap, as we've seen with all of them. Not surprising really when you've got a track temperature of 44 degrees Celsius and so many high-speed corners. You can soon build a bit of tyre temperature, and you've got to try and somehow keep the tyres in for the 3.44 miles. Another driver quite slow down to the sector 1. He's second slowest down there actually, Frentzen, but second car of the afternoon on the Bridgestone tyres. We've seen Michael Schumacher, I think probably what is the fastest ever lap of Sepang on a 1:34.9, 3/10 faster than pole position last year. A stellar lap from Michael Schumacher, a full second quicker than second place man currently Montoya. And Frentzen then will cut the beam soon, and now he's had a disastrous middle sector really for his Friday qualifying session to set tomorrow afternoon's running order for qualifying 2. And Frentzen pushing quite hard, but lost a lot of time in the middle there.
Well, he had a spin this morning in free practice, lost about 20 minutes of setup time, and you have to wonder whether that's costing him. Ralph Furman also lost quite a bit of time this morning, and Mark Webber for Jaguar has hardly done any running at all. We'll see how much it's costing all of these guys when they go out to do their qualifying laps. Frentzen through turn 15 then, out wide up onto the rumble strips, just putting the power down, accelerating across the finish line to go 6th out of 6 so far. So it's Michael Schumacher fastest, Montoya second, Raikkonen third, 4th is Coulthard, 5th is Jarno Trulli, 6th Heinz-Harald Frentzen, and the second Renault is out on track at the moment. That's Fernando Alonso just warming up as we look again at a replay of Frentzen.
Yes, Frentzen 1.3 faster than he went this morning, but I think he's going to be quite disappointed with that time, and that doesn't bode well. A lot of work to do, but they've got some running time, 1.5 hours on Saturday morning for further setup work. Alonso then, the second Renault driver out. Of course, he too had an extra 2 hours this morning. As a young man that everybody's raving about for the future, and certainly he was going exceptionally well all through the Melbourne weekend and probably deserved a few more points than he ended up with. But let's see how he's doing down to Sector 1, and he is actually the slowest of anybody, and it's strange how much slower people are now going through there. But, the two Renaults not really well hooked up, are they?
No, they seem to be. Well, they're claiming 130 horsepower deficit to the top teams, which is an enormous amount when you think that we're talking about a 900 horsepower engine. Certainly an awful lot of work for the engine people to do. As Martin was saying before, though, this chassis regarded widely as being possibly one of the best in the Formula 1 pit lane. So imagine what they could do if they got a little bit more grunt behind them. 9/10 of a second now, Alonso falling behind Michael Schumacher.
I find it difficult to believe 130 horsepower. That's really a poor effort if that's true. I mean, a fast saloon car's got that sort of, reasonably fast sort of family saloon car carries 130 horsepower. And of course, there's no extra weight to carry along with this. All the Formula 1 cars weigh the same. And I'd be somewhat amazed if there's that much difference. 60 or 70, I could believe. Alonso, his car really not riding the bumps well either. I noticed that particularly with Trulli's in-lap as much as anything. The Renault not good on the bumpy parts of the racetrack, and Alonso now 7th out of 7. Ted.
Martin, I think there is actually some funny tactics going on. There is an indication from some of the engineers I've been talking to this morning that some people will be actually running heavy fuel in this session. In Australia they didn't do that, but I think here they've got more to learn about the tyres and how they behave with about 50 kilos worth of fuel in the car, and they can use that well for tomorrow.
Yes, what you're suggesting is, Ted, which makes sense in a way, is for some of the teams to use this session as a practice for the Saturday qualifying 2 when they have to run their race fuel. I would be very surprised if Schumacher was doing that on his 34.9, or indeed Montoya and the two McLarens, but some of the midfielders, the Renaults, I think we expected a faster lap time. They could well be carrying a little bit of fuel to get an idea ready for tomorrow.
Yes, it's almost 2 seconds the margin between Michael Schumacher and Fernando Alonso. That does seem like quite a big margin. I would think the Renault was maybe 1.3, 1.4 slower in outright pace than the Ferrari. So possibly, Ted, you're absolutely spot on there. Bit of a wiggle there for Ralf Schumacher through the S's.
Yeah, Ralph really had a poor showing, didn't he, in Melbourne? Really was not in it the whole weekend. And this morning he was 5th fastest on a 1:37.0. Let's see how he's doing at the second sector cut anytime now, and he's 1.2 down on his brother.
The winner here last year, remember, dramatic win for him, the only win for Williams last season. It was a 1-2 as well, with Montoya coming through in second place, largely won through the performance of the Michelin tyre, and also the fact that it allowed the Williams team to do a one-stop strategy. Some talk that maybe Williams and McLaren might try that again tomorrow, carrying one-stop fuel load, because this Michelin tyre does seem to be very durable in the high temperatures. At the moment, though, we're watching a relatively low fuel run, probably from Ralf Schumacher. Let's just see what he cuts the beam in and see how that stacks up with his teammate Montoya's time. Montoya 1:35.9, Schumacher 1:36.8. Do you see any mistakes there, or do you think he's carrying fuel?
No, I'm wondering about the track, James, because ever since Trulli ran, who was 5th, everybody's gone a little bit slower all the way through. We're not seeing any particularly fast times. The track temperature now up to 47 degrees, and I wonder if the track's just losing a little bit of speed. Villeneuve then coming in. He's been absolutely ruthless about his teammate, hasn't he, in the press? And I had dinner with him and David Coulthard last night, and he surprised me over dinner as well. And Jacques really was pretty upset that he felt Jensen had sort of stabbed him in the back, claiming that he came in the pits and messed up the pit stop intentionally, and it wasn't necessarily a radio problem. So as Louise covered early on in the programme, really a lot of tension between Villeneuve and his teammate Button, who runs next. So maybe we're going to see some fireworks here and get a true feel for just how quick the track is. Yeah,
there's no question that these two are really egging each other on. It's rather like Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet back in the mid-80s. 6/10 slower than Michael Schumacher is Jacques Villeneuve. They're certainly driving each other on. But what was a sort of simmering battle between two teammates has really exploded after that incident during the race in Melbourne. And Villeneuve, as far as he's concerned, Button is weak. He never get anywhere with his career. He's proved nothing so far, and very, very strong words from a teammate to another this weekend. Jensen's letting the water let it bounce off his back like water off a duck's back, really. He's not really wanting to get involved, not wanting to fan the flames, but it's a highly volatile situation in the heart of British American racing. 1.1 seconds down now for Villeneuve, and as the possibly the main Bridgestone team after Ferrari, how they measure up to Ferrari is obviously of great interest as Villeneuve runs a little wide.
Yes, he runs quite a lot wide, actually. Lost the car on the way in, had to have a couple of stabs on the steering wheel to line the car up and get it through the rest of the corner, and it would have cost him 3 or 4 tenths surely at least. Now he's really getting ragged through the final turn, and I really think, James, that the track's giving up a lot of grip now. Drivers beginning to struggle, they're going slower and slower, and again, you know, that's the 9 out of 9 for Villeneuve, and everybody now is just going a little bit slower all the time, and Villeneuve really, a couple of mistakes there, of course, compounded that.
Well, the next man out will be Villeneuve's teammate Jensen Button, but if this track is getting slower, as we look again at Villeneuve just going through the S's, that's really bad news for Rubens Barrichello, who was hoping going last that this would play into his hands, but he may well find himself in really very much the wrong place tomorrow.
If you look at the way the dummy grid, if you like, and that's Villeneuve getting out of shape, having a couple of armfuls of lock, opposite lock. It's always a strange feeling to be turning left when you want to go right, but that's what you have to do when the back end of the car slides. But, if you look at the way this dummy grid, if you like, is shaping up, it's looking pretty traditional, actually, isn't it? Michael Schumacher would be on pole, followed by a Williams, a couple of McLarens, and a couple of Renaults. So it's really, at the moment, we're seeing reasonably predictable form as they do their single lap efforts.
Well, Button's first sector is a little bit quicker than Jacques Villeneuve's was, trying to keep it tidy. As we were saying before, you can see that Jensen Button is a very smooth driver. He has very little input into the steering wheel. He likes to take nice, smooth, calm lines, and when the car is working for him, he is very, very quick indeed. Certainly giving Villeneuve plenty to think about within that BAR team. 1.2 down though after the middle sector, and the track temperature, Martin, has gone up to 49 degrees now, which is a full 2 degrees warmer than it was when we started this qualifying hour.
Yes, and I think that's why they're struggling, and you'll see him having to constantly correct the car, even with the help of traction control on the way out. Of course, the traction control doesn't work on the way into a corner because you're not on the throttle pedal, you're slowing down at that point. It's only when you pick the throttle up does the traction control come in, and Button then really fighting the car towards the end of the lap. The tyres giving up a lot of grip as the turns unfold, and over the line he goes, and at last we've got somebody going a little bit faster than his running order. So Button goes up into 7th place, 9 tenths faster than his teammate. But remember, Villeneuve really did have a scruffy turn 14, I think it was, and lost an awful lot of time.
It's the Friday qualifying hour to decide the order in which they will go out for the real qualifying session tomorrow, Saturday. which will decide the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix. 10 drivers down, 10 to go. Michael Schumacher fastest still from Montoya second, Raikkonen third, Coulthard fourth, fifth is Trulli, 6th Frentzen, 7th Button, 8th Alonso, 9th Ralf Schumacher, and 10th Jacques Villeneuve. It's Giancarlo Fisichella sitting in the pit garage, and out on track is John Boss Verstappen, a man who had a tremendous race here 2 years ago, if you remember, in the Arrows, in the rain. I think he was up as high as 3rd or 4th during the monsoon period of that rain. A really fantastic performance by Joss. Sat out last season, but has come back this year with the Minardi team. It's his 7th year in Formula One, and he's had 6 different teams during his career. So certainly he appears to be to realise that it's probably his last chance, and he really wants to make something of it, and has been pushing very, very hard the first 2 Grand Prix so far. He's on his warming up lap at the moment. Fisichella just getting ready to go out. He will be following Verstappen out onto the track any moment now, as Verstappen starts his flying lap in the Minardi. And let's hope that we do not have a repeat of what we saw in Australia, where the Minardis didn't set a time. I understand that loophole has been closed, but you probably have better information, Martin.
Well, of course, that applies to Saturday, really, for the Parc Fermé situation rather than Friday. But yes, my understanding is the FIA say they will not allow that to happen. I mean, to allow those 2 Minardis to race in Melbourne, all the teams had to sign up and agree to give up on the 107% rule. So I think now, if you intentionally come in the pits, you don't have a problem, and you might just struggle to get in the Grand Prix, which will look a bit silly, of course. There's only 20 cars to start with. So I think Verstappen did a great job in Melbourne, and so did Wilson too, until his car got a hole in the radiator. Running up there just inside the top 10, Wilson was, amazingly, in the early stages of the Grand Prix, and neither of them had done any testing worthwhile. And Verstappen hurting around here, though, isn't he? 2.7 down on current fastest man Michael Schumacher, and he may not he's saying he really hadn't been in a car for over a year.
No, he's in pretty good shape, though. He's certainly kept himself fit. Certainly one of the disadvantages the Minardi team has at the moment is that they're still using 2002 specification tyres from Bridgestone. They have a slightly awkward relationship with Bridgestone, having switched over from Michelin at the end of last season, and Bridgestone not giving them the latest rubber that they're giving to all the other teams, which is a situation that Bridgestone say will be sorted out soon. But for the moment, unfortunately, they're using the old tyres, and that's only good enough for 11th place for Jos Verstappen at the moment. Next man out on track is Giancarlo Fisichella in the Jordan. He's just winding up at the moment. And Martin, you'd have seen some very interesting stuff from Fisichella following the Melbourne Grand Prix, saying that Jordan is going backwards, things are getting worse, and more or less implying that he's out of this team at the end of the season. A quick retraction was issued. The team obviously got behind it and said, you don't say things like that. But he never actually said, I didn't say that. He just clarified what he'd said. So clearly a lot of dissatisfaction with Fisichella.
Yes, it's slipping away a bit, isn't it? Fisichella was so highly rated, and really he's sort of pretty much slipped into Division 2 and knows he's got to do something about it. He's got a new manager in Enrico Zannarini, who used to manage Eddie Irvine. And I'm sure Zannarini will be out there trying to move Fisichella, what he perceives to be up the grid. But of course he's now 30 years old, he's no longer a young man, and he needs to be cutting the mustard pretty soon in his mustard-coloured Jordan.
Well, I know you rate him, so if you were his manager, where would you place him? What's the right place for Giancarlo Fisichella for next year, if you could get him in?
Well, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, he obviously hopes, as an Italian, he'll go to Ferrari if they decide to move away from Rubens Barrichello. But why would they do that? If you notice, the top teams are going for stability wherever they can with their technical force and with their driving force, and really, you know, gaps don't open up too often. If you look at the top 3 or 4 teams, and they've all got 3rd and 4th drivers lined up in terms of test drivers, some of them under political pressure to take certain nationality of driver because of the team or the sponsors. So it's very difficult at the moment to know exactly where you'd put Fisichella, but you'd certainly try to get him into a Ferrari.
Well, just coming through to complete his his only flying lap of the day, that magnificent canopy over the top of the main grandstand here at Sepang. Beautiful piece of architecture, and Fisichella goes up into 9th place, so he's ahead of Ralf Schumacher, Jacques Villeneuve and Jos Verstappen. Louise, what can you tell us?
Jack appeared to have a few problems in that session. He's a wee bit below you, but I don't suppose you'll be too bothered by that, will you?
I don't know, ask him.
Thanks, gents.
What do you make of that?
Well, I've been cruising around Grand Prix for about 19 years, and I don't think I've ever seen such vitriol between two teammates. I mean, we've had it a bit in the past with Senna and Prost, Mansell and Piquet, but this one is at a slightly different level. It's a real personal level, isn't it?
And the amazing thing is, it's only just started. They've only been teammates for a few weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, where's this going to end?
I remember saying on our preview show at F1 ITV to David Richards, you've got to do something about this. And he said, no, it's fine. They're winding each other up nicely, and it's competitive, and it's good to see. But I do believe it's getting completely out of control. Certain things going on in the background, and I think you heard about something this morning, didn't you, between the two drivers? And there's a lot of friction there, as we see. Pitzonia should be out there somewhere, and he's had a problem, look. So the Jaguar's not been able to take to the track. That's the first time we've seen that, James.
Yep, hasn't got a driver in the car at the moment, so it's obviously something that's happened a few seconds ago. The idea is you've got 30 seconds from when there's Louise walking in shot, no doubt wondering to find out what's happening, but you've got 30 seconds from when the previous driver crosses the start-finish line at the beginning of his flying lap in which to get your car out across the pit exit line. And clearly in this instance Antonio Pitzonia, whose name was misspelt interestingly when we arrived here on Thursday onto that board. They've obviously changed it now. Pizzanio they had up there when we arrived, poor fellow, but he's had a misfortune there. It's not been a great day for Jaguar. Webber had an off this morning, didn't do very much running, and Pitzonia now having problems as well.
Yes, so that means he will have to, unless somebody else has a problem, Pitzonia will have to go first tomorrow in the qualifying 2, the Saturday afternoon run where they establish the grid order for the Grand Prix. And Panis then, you have to say, this Toyota's looking handy, both Panis and D'Amata, a couple of solid pedallers they've got behind the wheel. And I think more than a few team bosses are keeping an eye on the progress of the Toyota team.
Yeah, both Panis and D'Amata went back to Europe after the Australian Grand Prix. Not too many drivers did that, most of them not wanting to put their bodies through the jet lag. A lot of them went training in hot places and that kind of thing. But Ralf Schumacher went back, doesn't seem to have done him much good. But Panis and D'Amata were testing at Jerez, did a lot of work, and D'Amata, in fact, the fastest of all at the Jerez test. And both of these guys really are putting in the spade work to try and push this Toyota team forward and forward up the grid, and you'd have to say that at the moment it looks like it's working. Panis qualified 5th on the grid in Melbourne. What can he do here this afternoon? Where can he place himself in tomorrow's running order?
Yeah, I was teammate to Ollie Panis back in '95. Good driver, solid driver. Don't see him as a megastar really, but I think a good progression for the Toyota team. But I'd be surprised if they don't need somebody a little bit more grandee than Panis to make another step forward. But he certainly does a solid job.
Well, I wonder whether Fisichella might not be approached. And we were talking about him a moment ago. Half a second down, though, Panis. There's been a few who've been further behind than that. And he's on the sort of BAR pace at the moment, isn't he?
Yeah, surprising he wasn't flat in turn 4, flat out on the throttle turn 4, and a big lift in 5. So Panis then not with the Toyotas hooked up as you want, clipped the curb. The car then bottoms out, it unloads. As soon as the load is going through the floor of the car instead of the tyres are losing a lot of grip. So not a great lap for Olivier Panis. You just can't afford to hit curbs like that around here. It's too smooth.
Well, we saw the track going away from the drivers a few minutes ago as the track temperature went up and up and up. It got as high as 48 degrees, but it's come down now to 41 degrees. That was obviously good news for Fisichella just a moment ago, but Panis doesn't seem to be capitalising.
Well, he made that mistake in the middle of the lap, didn't he? Let's see if he can improve towards the final sector now. He'll just gradually edge to his right-hand side of the track. Car darting around badly as he goes for the brake pedal. There's a few ripples coming in there as well. The Toyota way too lively. Panis will go over the line somewhere deep into the 10. In fact, didn't even make the top 10. So a disappointing run for Olivier Panis, but still puts him just ahead of Villeneuve and Verstappen.
Louise has been down trying to find out what happened to Antonio Pizzonia. Can you tell us, Louise?
Well, I tried to grab a word with Antonio, but he wasn't talking. You could actually see the steam pouring out of his ears as he walked past, but it appears he has good reason to be irate. It seems like it's a team error. By the time he got down to the end of the pit lane, the red light had already come on, so it appears the team have sent him out of the garage too late, and he's missed his slot.
Well, we understand they've been given a few more seconds today as well to try to separate the cars more on this longer lap. Otherwise, a car on his hot lap was going to trip over a car on a slowing down lap. And Jaguar then clean. Maybe they couldn't get it started up or whatever. Didn't come out of their garage early enough. You've got a 30-second, maybe it's 40 seconds today. There's, the rules are just fine-tuning all the time. I know yesterday more faxes were sent around the teams and signatures put on them. They're just tweaking them as we go along, and we're not always made aware of some of the changes in the media. And this is a good run from Heidfeld, isn't it? He's pretty much fourth or fifth quickest down to the end of the first sector.
Just 2/10 slower than Michael Schumacher in the Ferrari. It's the middle sector where the Ferrari is so special, and where Schumacher was able to put such an enormous amount of distance between himself and the nearest pursuer. Currently Schumacher fastest, Montoya second, Raikkonen third, Coulthard fourth, Trulli fifth. 1:36.3 was the time of Jarno Trulli, set earlier on in the session, and Heidfeld has lost quite a bit in that middle sector, but he'll be aiming to get himself somewhere around, I would think, the mid 1:36s, wouldn't you think, Martin, if the track stays with him?
Yeah, I think he could go up into the top 6 or 7. He was really having to fight the car hard through that high-speed turn 12, taking big chunks of steering wheel, which is unusual in such high-speed corners. So Heidfeld working overtime this afternoon, and no lock of the brake. Remember I said in Melbourne, he's put himself higher in the car to get a better view of the front, something you'd normally do on a street circuit, but not on a high-speed track. And he does indeed go 6th, just behind the Renault of Jarno Trulli. So Heidfeld with a very good effort.
Just in front of his teammate Frentzen as well. Next man out will be Justin Wilson. Into the last 5 cars then for Friday qualifying. They're going in the order, the reverse order from the result in Melbourne, championship order. So the cars that didn't get a result in Melbourne now are the ones out on the track. Justin Wilson had a stone in his radiator in the Australian Grand Prix. That's why he didn't get a result, and he's out on track. But I have to say that the temperature gauge is going up and down like a Blackpool roller coaster. It's been 41 degrees at the start of the session, went right up to 48 degrees when some of the unfortunates were out. It really wrecked their chances of doing a quick time. It's come down to 39 and it's back up to 40 again, so it's really all over the charts at the moment, and it's clearly having an effect on the performance of the cars.
It certainly is. What happens is the oils and general rubber and rubbish in the racetrack emulsify a bit more with the higher temperatures, and also the engine loses power as the temp comes up, and the tyres just overheat a little bit. Generally the performance just edges away from you. It's imperceptible sometimes, except on the stopwatch, and something we'll have to watch out for tomorrow, because we always said inclement weather really is the only thing that affects your, where you run in qualifying. It doesn't really matter, except if it's going to rain. The track might get a little bit faster, but of course the car's only doing 1 lap at a time, so there's not that much lappery going on. But it seems here that the track temperature is absolutely critical.
It should make a big difference tomorrow then in qualifying. If it does what it's doing today, some drivers will be unfortunate and some will not, and this is the beauty of the new rules. You've got no choice now. In the old days you could just sit in the garage in the period when the track temperature was up through the ceiling and wait for it to come back to you. Now you've got no choice. You must go out in your slot, otherwise you're finished. How's Wilson doing relative to Verstappen? Slightly slower in the first sector, a couple of tenths slower in the middle sector.
Yeah, and that's not bad. I mean, Verstappen's done a lot of laps around here. Wilson never seen the place until this morning, and so Justin Wilson once again doing a solid job, I believe.
Yep, Justin Wilson PLC has now been launched. You can buy shares in this guy's Formula One career if you want to. They're looking to raise about £3 million to help him through this season with the European Minardi team. Seems like a good idea. Certainly an awful lot of thought gone into it, and it'll be interesting to see how many people sign up. Justin Wilson, though, 15th out of 15 at the moment. And Ted, what can you tell us?
James, it was quite a funny moment as Mark Webber starts his lap. Jaguar actually sent him out while the light at the pit lane at the end of the red light was still on. He actually had to wait for a couple of seconds for it to go green. We do understand now Jaguar have actually taken a closer look a bit through the data, and it was a computer problem that was actually preventing them from firing up Pizzonia's engine.
Yes. But it does seem as if they couldn't get the engine started. But luckily they have for Webber, but he didn't do too much running this morning either. He was 18th fastest on a 1:38.8, and with a spin off the road, so a little bit of a black mark in the book of Mark Webber. Can he do something about it this afternoon?
Well, he had a fine run in Australia in the race. He was up to 5th place before the suspension broke, and we were told that they've examined that now and found that a drive shaft, in fact, failed, and that damaged the suspension. It wasn't a suspension failure on its own, which is something, but it was interestingly the cause of the retirement of both of the Jaguars in Australia. So clearly a few engineering issues going on there, but nevertheless still a lot of optimism within this team, and particularly with Mark Webber, who really feels he can do something with this car. He's had very little running, as Martin was just saying, so what can he do here on his first flying lap of the afternoon? 1.7 down so far.
Yes, he had a poor first sector, an okay middle sector, so he'll be into the teens, I would have thought, in terms of his position. So an early run for Webber tomorrow afternoon. Nicky Lauda, the ex-team boss, is here this weekend. I don't quite know what he's doing. He no longer works for Jaguar, although I'm sure he's probably still paid by Jaguar until his contract runs out. But I believe Lauda then will be flying back to Europe to do his job for German television. And Webber then through the final corner. That's a great camera angle, isn't it? Over the rear wing. I didn't stay on it too long, unfortunately, but over the line then for Webber, and he is indeed 14th out of the 17 people that have put a time in, the 18th being Pitzonia, who didn't get out of the pit lane on time because his Jaguar wouldn't start. But I think the drivers are finding this a bit strange. Great for us, we're seeing all the drivers, all the cars, every corner. But for the drivers themselves, I think they're finding a bit of a lack of activity. They've got their one-hit lap, they've got action for something around 6 minutes on the racetrack in total. Less than that, actually. It's 4.5 minutes, isn't it? With their out, a fast one and an in lap. And then I think they're finding that they're sort of getting itchy feet, want to get back in their racing car.
Finally, we cut to Cristiano De Matta, who's more than halfway around his lap. We've been looking at Mark Webber, but De Matta has been fractionally slower, just a 100th slower than teammate Panis in the first sector. His middle sector of 32.3 compares very favourably with Panis. It's slightly faster. So Panis is currently up in 12th place. That's the kind of area De Matta's aiming for, maybe on the fringes of the top 10. And an impressive performance from this young fellow, considering he's never been here before. He's done 1 hour of running. He was 2/10 slower than his teammate this morning. Seems to be driving very smoothly.
I think he's been very impressive. He made a silly mistake in the race in Melbourne, and there's another mistake as he locked his left front tyre unloaded across the ripples. You get a washboard effect where the cars brake there. Remember, Panis made a mistake in the middle of his lap too. De Matta goes 10th. That's a great run. Some 2/10 faster than his teammate in 4 places better. De Matta, an impressive run. And as you said, he's had a total of 1 hour around this racetrack. And in his life, in his career, 24 laps this morning he got in. But nonetheless, that's a stellar effort.
Yep, a really good effort. Rubens Barrichello looking quite agitated there. He wants the engine started because Furman is coming through to complete his warm-up lap. When Furman crosses the start-finish line for his flying lap, Rubens needs to be heading off down the pit lane. As we look at a replay of that lock-up Martin was talking about over the ripple effect where the cars brake, it's quite a lot of tyre smoke. Rubens is out of the garage. We've just seen him out of the corner of my eye heading down towards pit lane exit, and he will be smiling inside that helmet because he's got a track temperature of 39 degrees to enjoy. Ralph Furman, though, looks a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, he's really too aggressive on the steering wheel, isn't he? He's just grabbing an armful of lock. And remember, we saw the Jordans understeering a lot in Melbourne. And Fisichella didn't appear to have that problem. But Ralph's upsetting the car too much. He needs to calm down because the car, a Formula 1 car, is just fitted around you. You're part of it. And your movement, every movement you make is translated into the car. There's no give in a Formula 1 car. It's very stiff in its construction, it's very direct in its action, and anything you do behind the wheel or on the pedals transmits straight to the racetrack. And you can see Furman really just overworking his car.
Well, he was 3/10 slower than Fisichella in the first sector, and in the middle sector he's been 6/10 slower, so he's already almost a second off the pace of his own teammate. Well, he won here in the Japanese GT Championship driving a sports car, but He seems to be taking his time to get up to speed behind the wheel of the single-seater Formula One car. And Ralph Furman disappointed by his performance in qualifying in Australia, and I think he'll be disappointed by this as well.
Yeah, he had a bucket load of understeer coming through turn 14 there, which will give him a slow run onto the straight. He loses speed all the way down the straight, and a terrible last corner as well. So Furman goes over the line. We're on board with him as he crosses the line, some 3.2 seconds behind fastest man Michael Schumacher, and 16 out of the 19 runners.
I tell you what I really like, Martin, about these new rules is it allows us to see exactly what a driver does. In the old days, looking at qualifying, you'd perhaps get a few corners with them, that was all, but it gives you a chance to analyse exactly what they're doing, and it really brings the sport alive, doesn't it? Here's Rubens Barrichello just winding up to start his flying lap.
And the chances are we probably would never have seen Ralph Furman's qualifying lap before. And it's great news for the smaller teams because they're guaranteed to get some TV time, TV exposure for their sponsors, and that's not been a problem for Ferrari though, has it, in the last 3 or 4 years in terms of exposure for their sponsors. But no doubt about it, Melbourne, they definitely were under pressure. We've seen mistakes from them, but Michael Schumacher very much put that right earlier on in this qualifying one here on the Friday afternoon of Malaysia with a 1:34.9, and Barrichello looking pretty hot too.
Well, it's about 2 or 3 degrees cooler now than it was when Michael Schumacher set the fastest time so far. 1 minute 34.980 was Schumacher's time, and Rubens Barrichello running last here today because of the misfortunes he had in Melbourne. Can he turn that into an advantage? The track temperature 38 degrees. The conditions are more or less ideal for Rubens Barrichello. He knows that, and he is pushing the car now to try and get himself in front of his teammate, which means that he will go last tomorrow, but it's not working for him. He's half a second behind. Now he's got to worry about getting in front of Montoya, who's 1:35.9, was a full second slower than Michael Schumacher's. And Barrichello, there's Montoya. He's wondering whether or not this isn't for the grid, remember, this is just to decide the qualifying order for tomorrow.
Yes, Barrichello will want to show though that he can put Michael Schumacher under pressure. I'd be surprised if he doesn't go second, really. Decent top speed, quicker than the others, not quite as quick as teammate Schumacher. That means he was a little bit slower out of turn 14. Only 1 kilometre per hour though at the end of the straight, and Barrichello does indeed go second.
Well, it's been an interesting session, one that's been dominated very much by the weather. The track conditions here clearly have a huge impact on the performance. Are you lucky or unlucky about when you're out on the track? And that will be a very big question in tomorrow's qualifying session.
Well, there you are then, the 1 to 20 from this session. A reminder, the quickest starts last in qualifying 2 to decide the grid for the Malaysian Grand Prix, and that is Michael Schumacher by some distance. Villeneuve a second slower than Jenson Button. Right then, let's hear from some of the drivers.